if I was going to launch an e-commerce business today, it would need to have a subscription part of that business, and that's what I'd focus on. I'd focus all my acquisition efforts on that subscription side of the business.
Welcome to Honest E-commerce, where we are dedicated to cutting through the BS and finding actionable advice for online store owners.
I'm your host, Chase Clymer.
And I'm your host, Annette Grant.
And we believe running an online business does not have to be complicated or a guessing game.
If you are struggling to scaling your sales, Electric Guy is here to help. To apply to work with us, visit electricguy.io/connect to learn more.
And let's get on with the show. On today's episode of Honest E-commerce, we welcome Nathan Resnick. Nathan is the founder of Sourcify, and we discuss sourcing, manufacturing, and all things e-commerce. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Honest E-commerce. I am Chase Clymer, and today we are welcoming to the show the first guest that I got at Unite. I definitely picked up a lot of new friends at Shopify Unite 2 weeks ago. So today we welcome to the show Nathan Resnick. Nathan is the CEO of Sourcify, and I'll let him kind of tell you what that does. But first, we're going to go back way before Sourcify. What were you doing then?
Totally, yeah. I mean, Chase, thanks so much for having me on. Super excited to be here. My background actually stems in China. So 10 years ago, lived over in Beijing as a foreign exchange student with a host family that didn't speak English, attending a local Chinese school. And that was for a full year. Really just became so captivated by the culture, the language, and also the power of these factories, how products are produced. So 10 years ago, I started importing my own products and selling them on eBay and Amazon. Became really just captivated by products and how products are produced. So realized that in manufacturing and in supply chain, everyone has to ask, how do I find the right factory and how do I manage production? And right now, pretty much every company does that over email and Excel spreadsheets. So we've got some pretty badass software that brings a supply chain online to enable you to understand what's going on and have fun in time being of doing so. So really excited to be here and dive in, and let's take it from there.
Absolutely cool. So let's talk about the culture shock, getting dropped into China as a foreign exchange student. I've heard that's the best way to learn a foreign language.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, what I realized, I started studying Mandarin my freshman year of high school and just became so interested in the language. So my mom had heard of this program. Shout out to School Year Abroad is what the program's called. And they do like homestays around the world. And my neighbor had done a homestay the year before me and just came back with such an amazing experience. So she basically told me, hey, you should apply to this. I got in and was sent over to live with a host family for a year. And so it was so eye-opening. And this was, 2010, where, really China hadn't become as globalized as it is now. So people would, really look at you just in interest of what you're doing there as a foreigner. And it was such a fast pace. I mean, it still is such a fast, paced country that grows so much. And so it was such a interesting dynamic. I mean, I'd come home from school some days and be like, hey mom, to my host mom, what's for dinner? And she'd be like, oh, check the sink. And, there'd be live fish in the sink. I'd be like, all right, I guess we got, fresh fish or whatever it may be. And, when we first started selling online, we actually would go to these markets in Beijing, like the Silk Market or Pearl Market. And, honestly, we would just buy knockoff products, all sorts of polos, all sorts of, apparel. We did the Beats by Dr. Dre headphones, and, our margins would crush it, selling and reselling those products online. And, obviously it was illegal, but we were in high school and didn't know better. And it wasn't till, college, till university that I really began to understand the power of creating your own brand and private labeling and, creating your own products. So that's, really what we focus on nowadays. But, for me, it's been a learning process, step by step, understanding the culture, the country, how products are produced. I mean, I think, really the craziest part of a product that most people overlook is the pieces that go into it, the components that go into it. Like when people come to us and they say, hey, I want to produce t-shirts, I could ask them 100 questions about what kind of t-shirt they're trying to produce. I mean, I'm talking the fabric, the trim, the cut, the Pantone. There's so much information and details that go into a product that's often overlooked. And so we try to simplify that for a lot of people at Sourcify. But, at the same time, it's something that I've just been so interested in the past 10 years. And then the other part of it is transparency. There's no transparency in production right now. Like if company A and company B were to go to the same factory trying to produce the same product at the same quantity levels, they'd get back two different price points. And so for us, part of our mission is bringing transparency to supply chain and enabling companies to understand how much they should actually be paying for their products.
Awesome. Yeah. I haven't been to China. It's definitely one of those on my list. And I'm definitely, when I go, I'm going to hit you up for a lot of recommendations.
Dude, you got to come with me. I mean, I was there 9 times last year. I'll be there 6 times this year. I'm going in 2 weeks if you want to hop on the plane.
I'm going the other direction to Hawaii in 2 weeks.
Oh, that sounds nice too.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, cool. So let's talk about those, in that high school, doing the eBay thing. Did you guys ever build up your own Shopify store or something else? Or were you guys really capitalizing on those other markets, places
at that time we were just capitalizing on the other markets. I think I first launched my first Shopify site when I was 19, did, just over $100,000 the first year. I mean, this was like, I think this must have been 2015, maybe 2016. And it was when Instagram was just starting to take off. So there's so much organic traffic and reach on there. Facebook still had a lot of organic traffic. So it wasn't as hard. Like you didn't have to spend as much money to acquire customers, which is awesome. And, influencers would be like, yeah, send me the products. I'd be super happy to post about it. Whereas now they're like, hey, also pay me $10,000, $20,000 and I'll take some photos. You're like, all right, wow, it's got a bit more expensive. So those were, the days. And I started, launching my own hats, watches, sunglasses, backpacks. I mean, pretty much any fashion and fashion accessories we were doing. And then I became really close and helped launch some, pretty big brands now, like, Original Grain watches or Vincero that do, some awesome volume. And it's really amazing to see those companies, hit that, mid kind of 8-figure mark there in revenue.
Cool. So are you now focused on just Sourcify, or do you still have some of those smaller e-com brands that you launched?
With the amount of moving parts we've got going on at Sourcify, it's my complete focus. It takes up more than enough of my life, I would say. And though I love e-commerce and would be really interested in, growing and launching my own brands, I think number one, it's a bit of a conflict of interest in some sense because at Sourcify, we produce in over 300 different product categories. So if I were to launch my own brands, I don't want to step on any of our customers. And, I have complete respect. And, we've got non-disclosures with a lot of our customers too. So it's just not something that's in my ballpark right now. But, at the same time, I came from the e-commerce world. That's how I got into this, was mostly focused on the supply chain side. And, I think it's so interesting because when I talk to a lot of e-commerce founders, everyone stems from the marketing side of the business. They came from the digital marketing world or the paid acquisition world. And that's definitely a crucial part of your business. But let me tell you this, if you look at the $1 billion plus valued e-commerce companies, let's look at Harry's, let's look at Allbirds, what sets them apart is their supply chain. They are actually owning their supply chain. Harry's initially raised money to buy a razor factory, and Allbirds is completely vertically integrated with 2 Korean shoe factories. And so when you look at their growth and you look at how they've been able to, really take over their respective markets, or at least grow significantly in their markets, I believe a lot of it stems from their supply chain. And yes, their branding and paid acquisition and all of that is on point. It's a huge, huge part of their business. But I think what's overlooked really in the e-commerce world a lot of times is that people focus so much on their online presence and their ads, and they forget about, sometimes investing in their products and really creating amazing products. And also supply chains they can rely on. I think the balance in an e-commerce company comes down to cash flow. You've either got too much money in inventory or not enough money to spend on paid acquisition. And it sucks being in both worlds. You're either running out of inventory, you're like, crap, I can't get products in for another 60 days. What am I going to do? And now you've got to air freight products in. Well, I'm sorry, you didn't plan your inventory well, and you didn't understand the lead times of your factory. And the other balance is, spending, or having too much money in inventory, and that comes down to planning as well, and really, looking at the data. So, I mean, I love having conversations like this because, when I look at e-commerce and when I look at some of these companies, I look at the full picture. I come from having a supply chain background, but also having run my own e-commerce businesses where I know what it takes to acquire customers across channels, and to do so at scale, you've got to have the data in your supply chain to back that up. And that's what I think a lot of companies are lacking today.
Absolutely. Actually, so it's funny, on the way up to Toronto 2 weeks ago, I listened to a podcast, How I Built This, that actually had Allbirds on it. And hearing that story and just how long he had been working on that business before everyone else had heard about it. You know what I mean? And it's the one thing about kind of like the flywheel effect. Once things starts getting going with these businesses, and then all of a sudden there's this new groundbreaking, disrupting business on like the horizon. All you hear about is that like last 9 months where they've had that explosive growth. You don't hear about that last 10 years
totally
prior to that, when they were building that company. Yep. and putting in that hard work.
Yeah, I mean, even look at Jen Rubio from Away Luggage. She was on How I Built This too. And when they launched, the reason why they launched and started with those travel books is because they didn't plan out production correctly. They didn't know it was going to take that long to get those suitcases in, those pieces of luggage in. And so that's why they had to launch with these travel books as, pre-orders on suitcases. Was it pretty smart of them to do that looking back on that? I think so. But at the same time, I mean, they didn't plan to launch travel books when they first started. They just had supply chain issues. And I think too, looking at their company, I think there's a lot more that they could be doing if they, had their supply chain completely under control. And, you see the people that they've hired and that they're hiring, a lot of it is on the supply chain side of their business. Away is going to become this lifestyle travel brand that doesn't just do luggage. They'll do apparel. They'll do all sorts of travel-oriented products. And that's awesome. I mean, that's the direction that I think they should take as a brand. But, at the same time, if you're a company that wants to expand across product categories, you either need to hire up that expertise, which is very expensive, or you need to work with a company like Sourcify. So it's really a balance, I'd say. In an e-commerce business, there's two, main ways to grow, I would say, because at the end of the day, one product's not going to get you to $1 billion in revenue. You're typically going to have to diversify across SKUs and different product categories. And so you've got to be able to, source products very fast and in an agile manner.
Absolutely. So let's kind of talk about that. I know that a lot of the businesses that are listening to this podcast, they are in those early stages. They're finding their initial wins. They're finding their target demographic, their audience. They're getting those sales, getting that product market fit. When should I start really thinking about taking my products out from being manufactured by, my friend down the street here locally, to start thinking about more bulk orders, about custom fabrication per se? Like, when should I start thinking about that stuff, and when is it good for my business?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, being completely honest, I would say you should never have, your friend down the street manufacturing your products. I mean, if you really want to grow an e-commerce business that does a few $1 million in revenue, or, 10 plus, or, really something that you can live off of and do full time, I think you should always start with going overseas and investing some in product. I mean, you can do a minimum order production run overseas of like, $3,000, $5,000. Like, is the price point going to be the most competitive? No, because it's such a small production run. But at the same time, is it going to set you up to be able to grow and scale at the rate that you should be scaling? Yes. Is your buddy down the street going to be able to make, 10,000 units when you start to grow in the amount of time you want? Probably not. And then you're going to have to figure out that hurdle. Then it could be a barrier to growth. So I would say from the get-go, you want to start looking at, really scalable ways for production. But then when you're trying to expand your business, let's say you've got that one product that's winning and you now want to grow revenue. Well, think about ways that you can expand revenue around that product. Like, what kind of upsells or cross sells can you have either pre-checkout or post-checkout for that product? And that's where you should start looking to grow revenue first. Don't necessarily roll out completely different products right off the bat, but understand what kind of products fit in to the customer demographic that you're targeting, and see what would be a good fit for an upsell or cross sell. And that's a key component of launching that out. I wouldn't, necessarily launch out a whole new category before having some products that you can upsell and cross sell in the same product category. And like a great, really simple example of this, I mean, maybe not as simple, but for example, let's say you run a watch brand. Well, you could add custom engraving to your watches just by buying an engraving machine that costs maybe a few $1,000s. You sell, I don't know, a few hundred watches. All of a sudden you've paid back the machine and the rest is basically profit for engraving. I mean, it's super cheap to engrave a watch. So something like that, figure out ways to really increase the order value, I think, right off the bat, whether that be through, adding more value to your existing products or through, products that you can run as cross sells or upsells.
Support for our podcast comes from our friends at Simpler, a new way to staff 24/7 sales and customer service on your e-commerce store. It works with your existing email and chat platforms, so setup is quick and easy.
Simpler's network of on-demand, U.S.-based Simpler specialists are standing by to answer your customers' most common questions. Set it up for free today and then turn it on or off depending on your customer volume. You only pay $2.25 for every resolution. No hidden fees, contracts, or minimums.
Close more sales with Simpler by staffing your email and live chat around the clock with Simpler specialists.
Start your free 7-day trial at simpler.ai/honest. That's simpler.ai/honest.
I mean, I know that your knowledge is everywhere, not just specifically sourcing, though. That's where you're really bringing it to the table. What are some other things that these younger entrepreneurs in their journeys should definitely be thinking about as they kind of go down this path and they want to hit that, sustainable business where, some of these people these might be side hustles that they're bringing into full time, or these might be their full-time jobs and they're not seeing the margins that they really want?
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's a great question. I would say right off, thinking of numbers, outside the brand and outside of kind of your online presence, e-commerce is a numbers game. To be profitable, your, acquisition costs have to be under your margin. And I would say most high growth e-commerce brands, they're running at 90+% gross margins. You look at Movement watches, they produce that classic, black and red watch that they really scaled up with for under $10, about $9.50 or so. And they sell it for $100. It's a great margin to have, strong acquisition built in there, have, some operating costs, have fulfillment costs, have, duty costs. There's a lot that goes into that, all in landed cost. And so you've got to have those margins in there to really have it make sense for you. So I would say, at the end of the day, you've got to have a strong enough margin to grow, because if you're running 30% gross margins where you're, paying $70 for a product that you're selling for $100, you don't have enough margin in there to grow. And so I would aim for at least a 75% gross margin on all products that you're trying to sell, or at least have a way to get there, saying, okay, I know if I order 10,000 units in my, third production run, I'm going to get to a 75% gross margin, and be able to continue growing that margin as you increase production volume.
Yeah, that's fantastic advice right there. I've seen a lot of businesses that we've consulted with personally here at Electric Eye, or even other places, that where we get into the numbers and we're just like, you guys can't afford this.
Mm-hmm.
Just in general, and then it's like, this isn't a conversation for an agency. This is a conversation for your business. You guys need to go talk about this and make some decisions.
Yep, exactly. And it takes, it doesn't take that much time really to sit down and understand your numbers. The simple math that you want to do is, okay, what's your gross margin, which is basically what are you selling a product at minus what it costs you to produce it. Then you might want to add on the duty, you might want to add the freight cost, might want to add the actual shipping cost from your 3PL. And then you've got to figure out, okay, what's my range to acquire a customer? Is it going to cost me, or if I spend $40 to acquire a customer, am I going to be profitable on the front end? And if you aren't, well, then what's the lifetime value of your customer? How can you extend the reorder rate? Honestly, even looking at the Pura Vida bracelets acquisition that happened 2 weeks ago, the Pura Vida, they did $68 million in top line revenue. They netted, under $4 million on that 68 in revenue. And it's like, wow, their net margin is so slim. And they sold for, $75 million for a majority stake. I think all in, maybe the founders will make, probably over 100, which is awesome. For that business, it's fantastic. And it's a great exit for them. But, at the same time, it's amazing to see that their revenue is, pretty solid. But at the same time, their net is just so slim compared to their top line growth or top line revenue number. And I think a lot of that kind of is just around the amount of money that they're paying out to scale. But one mention that they really brought up, and that, some of the cool articles about that acquisition focused on, was their subscription box. They've got this Pura Vida, I don't know what they exactly call it, but it's a subscription box for their bracelets. It's $15 a month. You get, a few bracelets. And not only does it enable them to have sustainable revenue, but it also enables them to forecast production. And when you're a company that's having to put, money in the inventory like they are, it enables them to forecast that production spend so much more effectively. And so if I was going to launch an e-commerce business today, it would need to have a subscription part of that business, and that's what I'd focus on. I'd focus all my acquisition efforts on that subscription side of the business.
Absolutely. I think that another thing to consider when you're talking about your top line revenue and your margins is, if they're not where they need to be, just raise your prices.
Right.
No one's saying you can't. I think a great example of that is Netflix raises their prices like every 6 months, it seems like, and they publicly state, we don't care. The people that want this service are going to stick around.
Totally.
And the last 3 times in a row, I think they bet on themselves and done that, and they came out more profitable with losing people subscribing that day, right. But still with the new rate, they're still net positive, which is curious. So that's like a good example of just raise your rates. You might lose some customers, but who cares?
Yeah, and I think in the e-commerce world, it's such a balance because, price doesn't always reflect quality in some sense, and doesn't necessarily reflect the value. Price should reflect the value of the brand. You look at luxury brands, that's why their products are priced so high. So if you want to create a luxury brand, you shouldn't be selling your products for, a tenth of what, LV or Gucci or whatever is selling at. So think about that too. And then think about the revenue numbers you want to hit. If you're increasing your pricing by X amount, well, now maybe you only have to sell X amount of products to get to that revenue mark. So it's definitely a balance that you should look at. And I do think increasing pricing is a good way to grow.
Yeah, but I wouldn't say trying to get a 99% margin is the best. If you have a terrible product, your reviews are going to state that, and you're not going to see what you want in the long term.
Totally. Yeah. And even talking about reviews, there's that review platform, Yapto, that, they've been increasing pricing left and right. And now I think they focus on more like enterprise accounts, and it's a great business, but, there's a lot of companies out there that, botch reviews. And even on Amazon, there's a lot of fake reviews out there too. So there's, ways to create perception online that make it so people see what they want to believe.
Yeah, I would just always say, don't do any of that black hat stuff. Always try to do it the right way, or you're going to get caught, and it's going to end up costing you more than the gain you made on kind of skirting that.
Yeah, totally.
Cool. So you've been in this e-commerce game for a while. What do you see on the horizon for 2019, 2020? I know you were at Unite and you saw some of their really cool announcements.
Yeah, totally. I think the first thing that comes to mind is their fulfillment centers that they're starting to launch. And, the numbers they presented at Unite are extremely bullish. I honestly don't necessarily know if I believe that they'll be able to pull those numbers off, especially if they want to grow a fulfillment network like that. They're basically saying that they're going to have 99.9% accuracy on pick and pack at scale, which, not even, Amazon FBA does, and they've been doing this for a few years. No fulfillment company in the world is able or is doing that. So we'll see what happens as they scale up. They say they shipped 50,000 units, which is nothing. ShipBob and ShipMonk ship that in, half a day or less. So it's something that's going to grow. I think it's a very smart move by Shopify. Don't get me wrong. I think it's a great move by them. And I'm fully on board with it. But, at the same time, I just think some of the initial claims that they're making are really bullish and sets expectations very high. Which is, maybe a bit of a marketing play, but we'll see how it goes. And, I also know our partners, that run fulfillment companies like ShipBob and ShipMonk. I think I'm actually rocking the ShipBob hat right here too. But, it's such an interesting ecosystem, and fulfillment is such a crucial part of an e-commerce business too, because you don't want your customers to be waiting too long for your products, and you want to have a great fulfillment experience too. And they say, with their fulfillment network, that they're going to create kind of a partner fulfillment ecosystem where there'll be certain space dedicated to Shopify at these fulfillment warehouses, but I think that's going to really complex things quite a bit because it means it won't be under their control. I think what's really going to end up happening is they're going to invest more and more in their own warehouses and compete more with these other third-party logistics companies. So we'll see where it turns out, but I think that will really come to play more so in 2020, and they'll start to invest more and more in that. And then, one of the most bullish kind of estimates that I would see them rolling out with is honestly their own marketplace. If they control their own fulfillment, why wouldn't they create a marketplace for Shopify merchants as well to compete directly with Amazon and the marketplace that they have there?
Yeah, that'd be a wild one. I know that they're scaling kind of those integrations on the back end and really opening stuff up and making the platform a bit faster as well from like a development standpoint. They're pushing everything towards GraphQL, if that makes any sense to you. So it's definitely getting built out for fun. Actually, at the day of this recording, though, I think Cloudflare went down this morning, and there's all sorts of stuff happening. So that was fun. But yeah, I think the fulfillment network was one of the biggest things that like caught my attention because it was out of left field. Was not anticipating that at all. And then they finally let us edit orders, which was a giant pain point for any actual merchant. That was a big pain point for them, which then became a headache for me saying, yeah, there's like nothing you can do.
Right. Yeah.
No, I don't have to have that conversation anymore.
Yeah, exactly. No, I mean, it's also cool to see how much innovation they're able to bring to the table at the scale that they're at. So, they've really got a strong team there that's rolling out these features.
Cool. Awesome. Well, first of all, Nathan, before I get to the last question here, I want to give you a minute to talk about Sourcify because you're giving us time to talk about all your knowledge. I want to let you kind of talk about like what's the best fit for you guys. If our listener heard you talking just now and they think that they want to reach out to you, what kind of customers are you guys looking for?
Yeah, totally. I mean, we work across the board. I mean, that's the beauty of what we do. We work with some companies that are just doing a few $100,000 in revenue. We work with some Fortune 500s like Anheuser-Busch doing some of their B2B merchandise. So it's all across the board. I mean, that's really the beauty of what we do. And what our goal is to make sure you're working with the right factory, giving you price visibility. So we typically get you 2 to 5 price quotes across Asia. We've got our own offices in China, Vietnam, India, and Pakistan. Run production in pretty much every country in Asia, which is a lot going on as you can imagine. And we bring your supply chain online. So you don't have to use email and Excel. You can actually see what's happening in production and be data driven in your supply chain. So it's been really fun just seeing all the products that are produced and helping companies grow. I mean, that's really what we do.
Awesome. Fantastic. Cool. And then now if anyone wants to get a hold of you specifically, or I know that they can kind of read where you've been writing, what's the last thing that you've released?
I mean, we publish a blog post every Tuesday and Thursday. Right now, a lot of content has been on production outside of China. I mean, especially right now with what's going on with these trade tariffs, there's a lot of instability in overseas production. So it's something that we've been keeping a close eye on.
Awesome. Yeah. And just for everyone else, he's written for Entrepreneur as well, business.com. So he knows what he's talking about.
Yeah. I mean, definitely right for some pretty big media outlets out there as well. And, for us, everything we do from a content perspective and just in general is as educational as possible.
Hey, that's why I started this podcast.
There you go.
Awesome. With that, is there anything else that you want to share with the audience?
Yeah, I mean, feel free to reach out. Always happy to answer questions. We're at Sourcify.com. You can find me. I'm most active probably on LinkedIn or Facebook, just Nathan Resnick. And yeah, feel free to hit me up.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you.
We can't thank our guests enough for coming on the show and sharing the truth. Links and more will be available in the show notes. If you found any actionable advice in this podcast that you'd like to apply to your business, please reach out at electriceye.io/connect.
Please make sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcast app of choice.